For those who don't know me, I'm Brenna Nath. I'm the director of HOU Plus and events here at HousingWire, and I am the host for today's Lunch and Learn, which is super excited for me. This is one of my first ones, so honored to be here with this great group of panelists. Our subject today that we're kind of going to dive deep into, I've been able to have the pleasure of chatting with all four of them kind of throughout the week and even today on the importance of this. So excited to share it with all of our attendees. Dives into what AI has to do with mortgages. And we kind of learn and explore technology and the different trends that are out there, especially making sure that you guys get like the tangible takeaways that you need to walk away from on how does this apply to you today and where does AI stand today, along with some great references on kind of what's important to know since technology is quite the broad topic. A couple housekeeping items real quick. We know a lot of people like to get a copy of the recording after the fact. All attendees will be getting that afterwards. So stay tuned to your email. If within a few days, you'll get a copy of that there. Feel free to watch it again, take notes. Really great stuff here. And then of course, we do allow questions throughout the event. You'll see at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a chat kind of function. You also see a Q&A function. Feel free to jump in, drop your questions there at any time. To any of our participants, really our panelists, you can ask them or you can even ask to the group on any questions that you have during this discussion. We'll kind of chime in with those questions throughout the whole Lunch and Learn, so feel free to drop them in when you kind of start to have them. So the topic for today, I thought I wanted to set a little bit of background on. AI is, a common word. Bob joked going into this what it stands for. I tried to make a joke. Nothing really came there. It came with Apple, but artificial intelligence really is, AI, what we're unpacking here. And I've been on conversations recently with people and, we're in a world where crypto is getting more common, Bitcoin's getting more common. And how does that play in with AI nowadays into a world where the mortgage industry, we're still on paper, where we're still heavily, in this process that does take days, to complete. And so these four panelists really will dive into that. With me, I'll just go ahead and do some intros real fast. We have Bob Noble. He's the SVP of Product and Innovations at Softworks AI. You just saw him wave. And then we also have Matt Wood. He's the Senior Director of FinTech at Devon. Thanks for joining us, Matt. Hey. And then we also have Devin Daly. He's the Managing Director of Business and Development at Homebridge. Hey, Devin. And then to wrap us up, we also have Will Denslow. He's the co-founder and CTO at Regora. Thanks for also joining us, Will.
Hey, everybody. Great to be here.
This first question, let's go ahead and dive right on in, really is the foundation setting question that we wanted to kind of center the conversation on. Recently, we've been talking about technology and the capabilities it has to innovate in the mortgage industry. And one of the top conversations is also the misconceptions around AI. It's probably more relevant than you realize. It's definitely out there in our everyday lives. So can we start this conversation by going to where is AI now and where do you think it can make a difference in the mortgage process? Obviously, we all are in the housing space. So I'll kind of open that up first. Maybe Bob, if you want to kick us off and we'll just kind of jump in as you see fit.
Sure. I think you hit the nail on the head in terms of AI. AI may be the most overused term in the world right now. And I think before you get started is really to have a kind of a foundational understanding of what AI is. AI has been around for a long time, and I think it's important to understand that really there are two components that have to exist for something to be artificially intelligent. Right? It has to be able to sort of replicate human cognitive process, right? So it has to act like a human, solve things differently than a procedural program. And then secondly, these things that need to learn over time and get better and smarter. And so when you look at that as the backdrop of what AI is, how can it be applied to the lending space? Well, there's a lot of things that we do in the lending space today that that is not just black and white. That does require human intelligence and does require the ability to look and adapt to situations, anywhere from taking a piece of paper and converting that into electronic data. If we look at mortgage forms today, there's standards, but there's always deviations from that standard. So the ability for a machine to look at a document or look at a piece of work and understand the context of that work and understand how to apply business logic to solve a problem is something that is a powerful tool that could be used across the lending life cycle. So there's plenty of places where it can play. And I think it's really exciting that we're here talking about some of those opportunities today.
Sure. Bob, from a lender's perspective, we've experimented with different facets of artificial intelligence over the past couple of years in sales, making intelligent predictions about what borrowers, fit my profile so that I can prioritize them properly, automatically applying conditions to a loan file, and even using that same level of prioritization for following up with borrowers after a pre-qual right through to some level of automated income calculation. And I think it's critical that we do this level of experimentation and use different facets of AI as a lender, before we start trying to solve larger problems. I think it's much better to attack from a component standpoint, learn all about that component, and then answer the question, has it translated well, from my human expertise to that level of automation?
I'd add to that there's obviously a lot of experimentation with explicit usage of AI. Like you get a software program to do this specific process for you at a lender, but I think Brenna touched upon this. It's something that is part of that misconception around AI, but whether you've agreed to it or not, a lot of the processes and things that we're doing today, you're adopting AI. Brenna brought up spell check, right? That's one small one. Adobe Acrobat, being able to convert a document to computer readable text is just another one. Like every single time we are adopting a new piece of software, however large or small, it's really impacting our day-to-day in a significant way.
So William, I kind of held back because in your space, I think you guys are doing something pretty interesting. As an applied example, tell us a little bit about kind of what you're chasing in your business.
Yeah, for sure. So the appraisal component of mortgage, I'd argue, is probably the least sexy aspect of mortgage that you can imagine. And it comes with a ton of logistics, right, complications, because and it was a highly manual process and task of getting appraisers out to a property in the past. But this was a huge opportunity to use AI, because if you think about the old models of appraisal, it really acts like a taxi dispatch service, right? Mm-hmm. You'll have AMCs, or you'll have your appraisal desk, and they're trying to call up, who can take this order, who can do, X, Y, and Z. The model that, we've created, and the AI that we're utilizing, functions a lot more like, the Uberization of that. We've created AI, and it's so fascinating to look at the before and after of how people are choosing appraisers, because we've created this AI to efficiently get these orders out to appraisers, and the time savings are immeasurable. So yeah, small example of what we're doing there.
Yeah, and like Brenna, to get at kind of part of the question that we've left open, some of the other applications, you have AI that can be applied very successfully in kind of non-QM circumstances, where it's just differing, more fine-grained aspects of the property or of the collateral that matters across the whole due diligence spectrum. Whether you're talking about credit or property, et cetera, AI can play a role there. Fundamentally, for I think us in this conversation today, it's not okay. What does AI need, right? It needs to have compute, storage, and a whole bunch of data. And here's the good news: is we have lots of all those. We have access to really strong compute and storage in the cloud, and it's now kind of access to the point where anyone can have access at a very affordable price point, and also opportunity affordable. When it comes to data, we have loads of data at our fingertips, both within our companies and without our companies. So some of our first steps, like Devin was touching on, is let's look together in terms of, okay, if we have the building blocks, then let's take that step. Because a lot of it's organizing ourselves around that first application or that first understanding. Yeah. And then from that point, we don't have to be, personally, this is Matt Wood's gospel, is we don't have to be baby steps all the way. Take an experiment and then be willing to go. Because there are high impact areas that make a huge difference, and we don't have to necessarily just little by little by little by little get there. We can actually say, let's commit and let's chase down, you know, classification and extraction. Let's chase down alternative appraisal methods so that we can remove bias and increase efficiency. Those are all examples, I think, where it makes sense to go forward as it's proven kind of capable for our company.
Yeah, and just to tack onto that, Matthews, we talk about data, or data is king for AI, right? Everything starts with the data, and you're right. The computational power and storage is really sort of enabled the sort of prevalence of AI in a bunch of spaces. But I still think in the mortgage space, we are a data, paper intensive process. So it's really key. The first step has to be, how do we get that data from those non-electronic data formats and turn it into usable information that we can use in our models and our processes and everything else. Once we have good, reliable, and accurate data, and we're confident in it, then automation can introduce itself in other parts of the lending process. And to your point, Devin, I think if that foundation is set, then biting off pieces of automation, the lending process becomes more doable and not only more achievable, but also more explainable and more transparent.
Yeah. And I think what you're talking about, we all realize data is an asset. And in the mortgage industry, we gather a lot of information, but we don't use it holistically. And now when we're talking about, building those models, right, and thinking about the elements that become forward predictors for whatever it is, understanding whether or not somebody's going to close, or the likelihood they're going to bail, or, whether or not I'm going to approve this loan or not, right? That's when we begin to capitalize on the value of that data asset. And that's when, we start achieving our objectives of things like lowering our cost to produce.
Right.
One thing, so there's themes here, like the industry has a lot of data, the industry, this is kind of apparent how to take these steps. But a common theme that we even see at HousingWire is this idea of like, okay, why now? How is this year different compared to previous years? We just as an industry went through a pandemic, and I think you look at us now, we had a busy, hot housing market. Now we're actually halfway through, if you can believe it, 2022. I've had to switch my language there, that no longer are we kicking off 2022, but we're in the middle of it. And how do we take everything that you guys have just said and said, this is where we're at today, and this is what you need to know, or here's where we've started to use the data, or AI isn't new, and this is how it's important right now. So what's different about, June 2022, the next 6 months, than it was in past years? And maybe Matt, if you want to kick off the answer to that one.
Okay, so Bob and Devin gave us kind of a reality check earlier, right? Yeah. In that there's a lot of data available, but there's probably a lot more data trapped in our documents, in our paper processes. So in that sense, we have not hit a tipping point. There's still a lot of data trapped in our documents. But I do think what's been changing kind of year over year, quarter over quarter, is how accessible the actual application of AI is. It's far more easier to find a partner that can do this with you than before. Kind of wind back the clock, even just 2 or 3 years ago, to do it, you had to get your own data scientist. But now in industry, the companies that are kind of up and coming with the true applications of AI, using it as a service is much more attainable. I think that's a reality that's taken shape. That investment has paid off, and those yields are actually there for us to have. So I think that's one point. It's just accessible. I also think, though, here and now where we stand today, look, folks, you still have to do the effort, right? So, you're going to do your appraisal, and you're going to put the effort into your appraisal process. You're going to do the effort of handling your documents. So there's a lot of substitution cases where switch one out for the other, and the opportunity cost of doing that is actually pretty low.
Let me extend on that, the opportunity cost. Mm-hmm. In terms of why now, it's not just the mortgage industry, it's not just financial services, but if you look at any industry, the companies that invest in themselves when there's a lull are the ones that come out stronger. And, you know, you don't invest in yesterday's technology, right? You don't keep propagating the processes that you've used for 20 years. What you do is go through some form of process re-engineering and identify what your objectives are. And we all know we need to be faster, we need to treat our customers better, we need to lower our cost to produce, and all of those things kind of feed off one another. And so we have to look at technologies that are going to help us do that, right? And I think, you know, especially when we talk about AI, you know, a lot of our customers want to apply online. Well, how can we streamline that experience using artificial intelligence to, you know, take that rich set of information and potentially, you know, I mean, from our perspective, 35% of our borrowers that apply online also start uploading docs immediately. So if we can move a lot of those processes to the front, you know, and leverage automatic document recognition and start extracting data and doing things like automated income calculations, we're going to be so much better off and expedite that process, right? And improve that borrower experience.
Yeah.
I think you brought up a key point there, which is, you know, investing in your company during the lulls. And I think to your question, Brenna, why now? The number one reason that we got from lenders that, you know, they couldn't move to Rigora was we're too busy, we're swamped. Like the pressure is so high on all of our processes, we can't afford the risk of breaking something when we were clearly the best product for it. So it's like, this is a timing thing, right? And I think now, you know, remarkably, we're right after the Fed rate hike, right? We're signaling a possible recession. I think people should have FOMO right now about how to invest in their company and really refine their processes. And I think the other piece of it too is you have to look, you know, over the boom of the last couple of years, at how much money went into fintechs. I mean, it was billions of dollars that went into fintech. So you've got a slower economy. You're not going to have as many people going out and testing your processes and getting a mortgage, and you have abundant tech that is now utilizing all this AI and all this new, you know, accessible technology.
Yeah, I just to kind of add on to all that, you know, what is it that's saying, necessity is the mother of invention? I think when we lived through that big giant boom that you're talking about, we saw that that's a lot of people's processes were not scalable, right? As volumes increased, we had to add people, right? And it's just not a prudent operating model to scale with people only. To Devin's point, you know, the folks that are successful, the companies that are successful, learn from their past and see that, hey, we know that we're in a cyclical business, we have to be ready for the next boom, and we want to be able to scale without having to, you know, increase our operating cost over and over. The way you do that is you introduce technologies like the technologies we're talking about here, and AI technologies that can look at appraisals and do automation around that, look at documents, extract data, and do calculations around that, because that sort of alleviates the need to grow your organization with people only. I think that, you know, in the lending process, there is a part of it is art, part of it's science. The science part, let the machines do, right? And the machines will do it very well. And really that frees up your people to focus on the art part of it. And that gives you that scalability that you really need during peak times as well.
Those are all great points. This next question that I kind of have really is, I think, almost a continuation of that in a way, right? So we've been looking at where the market is, why now is the great time. Will, I love that you said FOMO. Great word for kind of the environment that we're in. Moving into this next question that we've kind of discussed is, you know, no one wants to be replaced by a robot. That's not kind of the dream that we're kind of going into. But really, the reality that I think we'd love to set here is, what is the efficiency and the welcome attitude that can come with AI and that can come with technology to make their jobs, make their lives easier? So how do you balance the human element in this conversation? How do you balance, like, hey, here's the growth of technology. And Bob, you and I had a great conversation about this that dealt with Top Gun as a spoiler for anyone who hasn't seen it.
I haven't seen it yet. Don't spoil it.
But just a great question here about, how do we deal with, tech adoption might be a tough sell among staff. So how do you deal with what people might think about it in that image?
I could start. I think that it's important to know that AI is not really meant to replace people. It's really meant to let people focus on what people do really well, right? People are not great at looking at 400-page documents and 7,000 data elements, doing stare and compare. It's monotonous. It's not fun. Nobody needs to do it. Machines can do that really fast and really well. So let people, and it frees up folks to do sort of higher order thinking and do better, more creative stuff. And the example I gave you was, back in my old GE days when I was in grad school, is we worked on a lot of automation as it related to commercial flight, so autopilot types of things. And what we found is we looked at the flight patterns, and people take off, plane goes in the sky, and then the plane lands. That part between takeoff and landing is really easy to automate because it's kind of boring. You stay at an altitude, you make sure things are good, you keep an eye on it, and everybody's happy. And so the pilots were completely happy to be replaced in that capacity, so they didn't have to keep their hands on the yoke all the time. But where it got a little dicey was when we tried to automate the landing process. And I don't know about you, but when I fly, the landing process is the most important process in the whole thing. And what we found is that machines did a really great job, but when things got really variable, or you needed creative thinking immediately, it became a situation where humans could not be replaced, right? So it was a really an interesting lesson for me, in that you can automate a lot of the drudgery in the person's day-to-day life, but the humans are the most creative, powerful machines on the planet. Let them focus on the problems that only people can solve, like taking off and landing airplanes. That's my little background, my little story.
Thanks, Bob. Although I would say that takeoff, if it's successful, then landing is the most important.
Once it's in the
if takeoff doesn't work,
you gotta get in the air.
You got to get to the landing. Yeah, exactly.
90% of airline accidents happen on takeoff.
Thank you. I remember that next week when I fly.
That's why I keep my eyes closed on both of those parts of it.
So, but Brenda, back to your comment around just people and our relationship to technology, right? For all of us, in a degree, we have choices to make in terms of how we want to relate to technology. Like when I sit down, I have kids. When I sit down and I'm on TikTok, they're embarrassed that I'm on TikTok, but they're so much more comfortable in this environment that's algorithmic driven, right, than I am. I would prefer like check boxes, right? And so there is a behavior change that takes place as we adopt technologies, and part of the fearfulness, part of the missing outness, forgive me, is just, I think, that behavior change. But when I look at, like Devin and William and Bob and even my company, what we're doing together in industry with AI, the kind of the through line that connects all the different activities is all around quality. So it's not really a question of shifting labor or changing labor or eliminating people. It's about quality, using the tools we have to drive quality into this value we create as an industry. We create mortgages. We create, this asset that actually can be put to use in the world. And so in that sense, I think that if we can keep our eye on the prize as quality, it's a much easier both conversation and decision set to approach in terms of how we want to apply artificial intelligence in how we create value today and how we want to tomorrow recast and create value differently tomorrow. A year or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 years from now, because we have the opportunity to apply it completely differently. But in the here and now, my take on it is let's focus on how it can improve the outcome. And as we do that, like Bob mentioned, it also will free us up as individuals to use our best talents in the best way.
So, I agree with everything that we've just said. But I'm the mortgage lender here, not the vendor, and I'm going to say that from an old sales mentor of mine who now happens to be at an AI company, what he used to say when we were together years ago was, people buy software, intelligent services, either to make them money or to save them money, right? And so if let's tie the two of those things together in a really positive way. If we're going to use AI to drive more business because we're going to go after the right customers that match our products and our people's personalities, right? Then there's not going to be any destruction of people on the other end, because we're going to scale, right? And we're going to be able to scale with the same level of personnel that we are today, unlike when the pandemic began and we all had to go out and pay $400,000 a year for an underwriter because they were an extremely scarce resource, right? But if we don't do that, if we don't balance how we leverage the technology and intake more business and scale with the same number of people, then what's going to happen is if I stay at the same level, in order to achieve the ROI that I'm forecasting, I am going to destroy some positions that humans currently fulfill. Now, that said, it's not all positions, because here's the good news. We're also creating roles here, and we're creating kind of non-traditional technology roles. And what I mean by that is you don't want your run-of-the-mill system administrator coming in and training your AI or working with your vendor to retrain it or tweak it. You want someone with deep domain expertise. You want that person who was an underwriter for 20 years or 15 years, right? Who's now going to take a different role. It's not going to be an underwriter anymore, but it's going to be in charge of or working with on the training or the tweaking of whatever facet of automated intelligence that we're employing.
Makes good sense. So here's my question to the group then, like, what are the pitfalls? We've talked very positively about all this, which makes sense because we believe in it. But, what are some of the challenges that you guys seem to encounter? Like, from my side, I'll kind of lead out, in my side, making the kind of focused commitment to training a model. I find a lot of our clients kind of struggle with that first threshold of not only defining the objective and the outcome we want to pursue, but then that commitment of data and training, that time period of making it work for the company. I think it's a different kind of commitment, in the sense that typically you can buy some software, install software. That's kind of our mental model. But in this case, you are adopting a way of doing work. And I do see that as one point of friction in the current environment.
Yeah.
What do you guys see?
Yeah.
I agree with that statement wholeheartedly. I think the biggest point of friction, though, is, and you used the phrase earlier, it's behavior change. Whether you're dealing with underwriters or processes or salespeople, having them change their behavior, whether it's the priorities that you're automatically giving them, or the fact that you've already automatically conditioned a file, or you've already run an income calculation, they either don't trust it, don't feel it's tested, or nobody's gone out and said, here's the new process, right? So we use the term organizational change, and that means a lot, right? It's process change, it's training, it's getting people to change their behavior, and then ongoing monitoring that they're actually changing their behavior. And so you're absolutely right. Even if we say that AI is easy and it's like enterprise software of the past, where we just go get it and install it, train the model, and we're committed to that, the point after that is making sure that people are actually changing their behavior to achieve that ROI, right?
I agree.
That's the big challenge.
100%. I think the part of that behavioral change has to come with having confidence in the results that are presented, right? So transparency and explainability. How did I get to this answer? How did I extract this piece of data is really important to help drive some of that behavioral change, because trust is ultimately a key point, right? If your underwriters don't trust the answer, they're going to go back and double check it. That's what underwriters do. So they have to have that trust that they're getting presented with the right data or the right answer, so they can focus on the next thing. So I think, once again, transparency in AI is critical.
I think there's also a mindset change. And I think you kind of spoke to this, Devin, of having people with very deep domain knowledge, because you'll also have, I feel like, some skeptics at the same time, even though that number might be more accurate than a human might be. They might say, oh, I know better, right? And one thing that, we've seen, and it's again, super interesting, is seeing the before and after of allocation, because people have these very robust, complicated allocations that they're doing in like Microsoft Excel, and it takes multiple people to do these things. But when you look at the AI, it's like so much more efficient, but people are convinced that, hey, this is absolutely, the Excel is how we do it. That's the magic Excel, right? So I think there's a little like curmudgeonness that's presented there too. And I think it does speak, Devin, to having over time, because of AI, more specialized roles at lenders, more, deep in their respective domains.
Yeah, agreed.
That leads well into the second part of that. I would think would be good to dive deeper into, and maybe even kick it off to you first, is you acknowledge there too kind of some of the fear or some of the like the risk that people might associate with AI. I mean, that's an area obviously you've had to have conversations around. So how do you balance the people who are nervous about the risk when it comes to integrating AI into the origination process? And that's obviously a big word. I mean, a big process, origination process. So you have everything from the start to the closing, all throughout that, including the appraisal, which is kind of your world. So can you talk some about, how AI increases or decreases concerns in the mortgage origination process, and how does AI actually change things?
Yeah, and I'd love to get Devin's opinion after this from the lender perspective, because from the vendor side, right, like we don't see as much of the risk aspect. But I will say, like, and I know we were talking about this before the panel started, I think it comes down to auditability. It really comes down to making sure that the results that you're being given by the AI is truly better. Because if you can prove that, it becomes a very easy sell for operations and everyone included to say, hey, like this is absolutely the resulting value. But it also kind of back to what I last said there, I think there's always going to be holdouts, and that's part of the change management process of getting people comfortable with it, and taking small chunks at a time.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. And, the way we've rolled that out, and we made the mistakes at first of just thinking that, this is just like any other software, hey, train people and they're going to do it. And then we realized this is, we're not as efficient as we thought we were going to be. And, we're fortunate to have a pretty robust loan origination system, and we can look at people's behavior on a minute by minute basis and see what they're doing. And we could look at the patterns and see that, oh, you're not, you're not taking the steps we told you to do. You're still doing it the old way. And so we were fortunate to have that information to go back and change people's behavior. And so when anybody's going to engage in this, and I'm sure all of you guys, tell your clients this, you have to have a program after the program. And the program after the program is about making sure people have changed their behavior. And when they haven't changed their behavior, how do I nudge them back, into the right process or into the new process?
I'm stealing that phrase, program after the program, Devin.
Program after the program. I wrote it down.
Good swag shirt.
There we go.
Here's a thought. As my firm, we do a lot of R&D, and when we look at kind of AI and the technologies that are kind of adjacent to it, one of the things that kind of stands out repeatedly, we've even touched on it indirectly, is this notion of transparency. Regulators have always wanted people that offer a credit decision to unpack that decision and make it explicitly understood. One of the challenges when you apply AI to like predictive models or propensity models, it becomes a little bit opaque. We're not quite comfortable with how do you get to transparency with AI. I do think that's one of the kind of under the covers risks that we're seeing play out at least from an inquiry point of view, from the regulatory side of the equation. My question to Bob, maybe you, because you're more skilled at this than I, is how do we surface transparency of an AI model to stakeholders? How have you seen like people succeed that way?
Yeah, so I think there's challenges depending on the model types, and there's challenges depending on sort of the type of AI you use, right? Classification is a lot easier to explain than sort of statistical modeling. So I think transparency comes from a couple different ways. Being able to show, so in our world, being able to take data off of documents, being able to explain how I got the data off the document, and then cross-referencing that data across multiple documents gives you a level of transparency and accuracy that you wouldn't traditionally get by just looking at a document in context. But other AI systems really have, I think it depends, it's a terrible answer, but it really does depend. And in some cases, and this may seem a little crazy, but sometimes you have to use AI to govern AI. And what I mean by that is being able to use AI tools to run models and simulations against models to show that there's no bias, or to prove that the answers are consistent with the ground truth that you have from a human output. I think even within the lending process itself, we're working on tools that will take the lending package itself holistically and look at all the data and documents to make sure everything it ticks and ties and matches. So the long answer and short answer and vague answer to this is it depends. But whatever we do, either through AI, the use of AI to verify AI, or the use of audit trails or levels of transparency to show that how we did this, or we're claiming this level of accuracy. Did we get this level of accuracy? It really is important. Whatever that mechanism is, that trust has to be built, right? And I think that one thing we've learned, I mean, if we go way back to some of the early automation models in the lending industry, there was a willingness at a point to just give up the pen and say, DU said it's okay, so it must be okay. So I think making sure that you always trust the AI, but don't forget to verify. So when it comes to making sure that you have audit processes in place and that you constantly look at your models to make sure bias wasn't introduced, and that it doesn't start to go off the rails, is really important. You don't want to let these guys run unattended. So, there's an old Middle Eastern saying, trust in Allah, but tie up your camels at night. And I think that that applies with AI too. Trust that it's going to work, but you always have to keep an eyeball on it.
So, Bob, I don't know if that was the answer you're looking for, Matt. I knew what you were saying, Bob, but I think you have correctly articulated the complexity around how to give that transparency. It's inherently complex, right? But I think, and there was this super interesting question in chat. Someone's asking, should they invest in in-house personnel that have a background in AI or work with a partner? And I thought that was like weaving very well into that kind of answer that you gave, because it's like, I think people would be inclined to work with a partner such as yourself, given that AI is not one single problem. It's kind of a reactive and highly specialized kind of category of process. I guess, thoughts on that, Bob?
You go ahead, sorry.
I made the investments. So I'll tell you, I'll use Bob's phrase, it depends. I worked with outside vendors, professional data scientists, when I wanted to develop a model to do better marketing and do better predictions and do better prioritizations for my loan officers. I probably wouldn't take that to a firm who's going to sell it to every other mortgage company, right? But when I look at a firm that's using machine learning to recognize documents, stripping data out of those documents. There's a lot of advantage to doing that en masse with hundreds of mortgage companies, right? There's a greater learning, there's a greater catalog. It used to be years ago, the big challenge when you wanted to do optical character recognition is the first thing you had to do is train all the documents. Like, well, haven't you done this 200 times before? That's a really frustrating process. And I think that's one of the key differentiators of a company like SoftWorks AI and others that are out there. So I think the answer about investment depends. And it depends. Do you think this is a strategic differentiator? If so, then go out and hire a data scientist. But beware, a good data scientist is like a good doctor. They're very expensive. And so then if it's not strategic and it's part of your process, then I think that there are lots of vendors that can engage and really deeply partner with you. And that's the key that you got to look for, because I'm going to go back to the previous question where the person said, hey, it seems to me that there are people when I get into these projects that just want to move the project forward and click the checkbox. You've got to really interview your vendors better and understand, do they have a methodology for doing this? And what's their incentive? How do they incent their people? Is it 100% customer satisfaction? Is it a fully configured platform, right? You've got to figure that out, whether or not you really have a partner in getting the software up and running. A lot of, I'll say it out loud, right? A lot of SaaS companies, their motivation is to get you up and running and building so that they get their annual recurring revenue, right? That's not a partnership.
Right.
You want the software to work for you and to achieve your ROI.
The kind of the Occam's razor that I use here is typically, to answer your question of should we invest in-house IP or not for AI, if it's top line generating, then that's going to be more close to the vest strategy. You'll want to hold that IP in the company. If it's bottom line affecting, the whole industry is chasing the same bottom line savings. So perhaps you can be differentiated in the short term, the next 36, 48 months. But in the long run, we're all chasing the same savings through pretty much the same tools. So that's how I would look at it to answer your question in chat is really, what's the purpose? Is it top line, bottom line? If it's bottom line, let's find people to work with. If it's top line, maybe that's where we would invest some differentiation.
Yeah, I think that's a perfect answer. I think if you are looking to use vendors, however, I think your point earlier about in-house expertise, right, having that domain expertise that understands how the tool should be implemented and how it should work is key, right?
But I'll draw an analogy, because we've all done this. Remember when we used to have our own data centers, right? and how many people in the world are there that can really build a data center and keep it up to 5 nines reliability, or shoot, let's say 98% reliability, right? There aren't that many. And I think there are fewer really good people who can deploy in the mortgage industry, specifically artificial intelligence. And so, we've got great partners in the mortgage industry. I used to joke that the worst thing that ever happened in the mortgage industry was its vendors. But over the last several years, I've seen that change. Seriously, I mean, it just was the case, right? But over the last couple of years, I've seen that change. I've also seen lenders really be on a path to adopt technology much more rapidly, which means we have to have more discipline in the process.
Mm-hmm.
I hope we've grown on you now, Devin.
Yes, yeah.
Way more liked. I appreciate you for it too. Those were great questions from Teresa and Lauren. So I love the insights that you guys were able to share on that. The one area that I don't think I heard you guys touch on as most, that would love to maybe dig into a little bit more, is AI and the consumer experience, the customer experience when they're going through it. Can you dive into that a little bit? I mean, we've talked about how to apply it, how it helps kind of in the process, but what about the experience and the customer experience that they're getting? And I think I've chatted with you all about this, but maybe Devin, you can kick us off with it from maybe how you're seeing it from a lender side on the user experience.
Yeah, sure. We're in terms of leveraging it for benefiting the customer experience, we're at the very early stages of that, right? We want to bring as much upfront as possible. And when I say upfront, we're really talking about some of the underwriting components. So that we can help loan officers be more responsive to borrowers, especially in today's market. I need a pre-qual updated. And we want loan officers spending the right amount of time with borrowers. So we want to, we want to do things, and I'm talking about automation here, not necessarily AI. But then there's an intelligence component to it that says, hey, I've run credit, I ran product and pricing. Here's what we think, the recommendation engine is for this borrower, and is it going to fit, right? And here's the likelihood that this borrower is going to close with you. All of those things, one, help our loan officers, and I think also help our borrowers as well through a better experience. We can tell them, based on the data we've already gathered, and we've gathered in minutes, here's the best product for you. Because really what we, it's my thesis that the loan officer of the future, is not an order taker anymore. And quite frankly, I think a lot of loan officers that are here today are going to fall out of the business, because we've got to be much more consultative, because that's what people today want. Right? We can go out and get a wealth of information. I want somebody to synthesize it for me and give me a great set of recommendations. And that's what we need to do for the borrower experience. So if I can take the information that I've gathered and synthesize it for the loan officer so that they can turn into that great consultant, that's our objective. Does that make sense?
It does.
It's a great answer, yeah.
I have family that's moving across the country. So they just sold a house in Phoenix. They're buying a house in Philadelphia. They want to live by us. But here's the problem they had. It took a very long time to get the appraisal on the Phoenix side of the equation. So that actually tacked on, like 3 weeks. It was crazy. And then their house sold fast because the Phoenix market's so just hot as the sun. And then now in Philadelphia, buying the new place here, there was just a simple miscommunication between title and loan processing, and that's tacked on another 2 or 3 weeks here. So think about it. They've been outside of a home for a month now, with 2 problems that are solvable. And in terms of applying AI to those conditions, certainly there are models that can handle coordination of workflow in a more intelligent manner, looking for both outlier and automated flow. And of course, William can speak directly to, how you crack the nut and get an appraisal done. But I mean, that is like how, customer experience is today. I think all of us that have done, recent mortgages, and many of us have because of rates, have gone through, we've seen firsthand where the process works and where the process stumbles. And there's many opportunities along that entire value creation chain where AI can influence both speed and accuracy.
Mm-hmm. When I first graduated school and started working, I went to work for GE Research and Development. And the first thing they told me to do was, hey, go figure out how we can introduce automation to the lending process. The capital businesses were just getting into the lending space. And I was like, all right, sure. How hard could that be? And I looked at the process, and I just from a high level, I was like, it amazed me that I could go buy a $50,000 car in 2 hours and drive it all over the country. But if I wanted to buy a $50,000 house, it would take me weeks, if not months, to get that same piece of value. And I'm thinking, the house isn't going to go anywhere. The house isn't going to drive cross country. The house isn't going to depreciate overnight. And what I realize is, and I know there's plenty of reasons why it takes a while to build a house, but buy a house. But what I realized is that, there's not only plenty of opportunity to automate and save, but there's plenty of opportunity to really give the customer a better experience. To your point, Matthew, how can you automate and make things more effectively and more efficiently to reduce costs for the borrower, to get them in their houses quicker? And then from a satisfaction standpoint, one of the biggest bottlenecks that I found in those early days, back when the dinosaurs roamed the planet, it was that, the borrower interaction with the lending company, right? I need a W-2 from you, Matthew. Okay, I'll send it to you. You send me the wrong one. I got to send you another. Back then it was letters. Then you have email. I have to send you another note. Hey, now you sent me the wrong one. I need these 2. You get it back. Now that's time. So from a customer experience standpoint, if you can keep borrowers engaged up front while they're delivering information, while they're providing you stuff, give them a W-2. Oh, immediately tell them, hey, that's great. I need 2 more. And oh, by the way, this one's out of date. Or if they need, they have a property, immediately go get those appraisals done as quickly as possible. shorting the cycle time, keeping the borrower engaged, not only saves money for the lenders, but it makes the borrower happy, gets in their home quicker, and then it's a win-win all around.
Makes sense.
Anything to add? Well, I mean, you're in deep with the appraisal world. Any comments there?
Yeah, no, I mean, like, I think it's been covered, AI is going to make the borrower experience way better.
Yeah.
My only caveat to that, I think we all agree with that, is, and we mentioned this at the beginning, you can't do that unless you have all of your data centralized and you can actually start profiling, monitoring, analyzing and finding a way to model and make the experience better to begin with. So I just reiterate, like, if your data is not all in one place, you don't have a data warehouse, like, you should figure out how to get it done.
Yeah, Will, let me ask you a question. Is you threw the term out before, the Uberization, and I think that's something that can resonate with everybody. And doesn't it play that? Aren't you playing that role in the appraisal? Aren't you now, disintermediating? It used to be the realtor from the borrower and enabling the borrower to take control of that appraisal process, aren't you?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've talked about the actual allocation components, but there's a lot of cool stuff happening with Freddie and Fannie around property data collections as well.
Yeah.
That, when you're leveraging the same kind of automation that we did with appraisers, and obviously there's this supply and demand issue there, right? Especially during the height the last couple of years. And you apply that to what now could be, real estate agents or brokers going out to collect data on properties instead of appraisers. We're going to see some crazy fundamental changes in how we think about appraisals in the next couple of years. It's going to be a dramatic difference. So
That would be great.
Excited to see if the appraisal was part of the thing that messed up the mortgage for you, Matt. I apologize for the industry. Hopefully we'll get that one fixed.
I think you already have.
I think here in our last 7 minutes before I kind of jump into the closing kind of outro, it would be good to just do a quick roundtable. You even just mentioned there, well, hey, 2 to 3 years, what will the appraisal process look like? And one wrap question that I have is, okay, we've been talking about AI this whole time. What other trends are you guys watching for, or what are you even watching for when it comes to AI specifically transforming the industry as people maybe adopt more over the next 2 years or even more? And so in just kind of a few words each, we can go around and just say, this is the trend I'm watching, or this is what I'm expecting for AI, stuff like that. And maybe Will, I'll kick it back to you since you kind of started to go one direction in that, and we'll do a quick circle and then close out.
Yeah, and this is great timing because I'm very excited about this thing that just happened. A piece of appraisal modernization is going to be having a property data collector, not the appraiser, go out and scan a home with their phones and sending that data back to Fannie and Freddie. You're good to go, right? That is very difficult to do. To have your phone scan a house in 3D is a very difficult thing to do. Last week, Apple has just unveiled that they are releasing a set of frameworks called Room Plan, where they've built their own, almost like the camera app, way to scan your house and create a GLA compliant floor plan. Now that's coming out with their new SDKs. It's still in beta, but you can see where the industry is going, and very soon in the future, it's exciting to think that a borrower could scan their own house, send that information back, and then they're good to go.
Wow. That's a great insight there. Bob?
I like to look at all sorts of trends. I think that, one of the things that I'm looking at right now is a lot of focus, and rightfully so, has been spent on the origination side of the house. But what are some of the trends, and what are some of the needs in the future on the servicing side of the house? It's often not looked at, but how can we look at tools and develop things that can look for unstructured data within documents or within other forms of or other areas. How do you start looking at free-form text and extracting information and quantifying it? So I think there's a real untapped area of data in those semi-structured and unstructured documents. And if you can crack that nut, then you can really apply some of that usage, not only to the front end of the mortgage process, but really start focusing on the servicing side and even the post-servicing side of the world, and even making better investment quality packages to deliver to investors. So that's kind of what I'm keeping my eye on right now.
Matt?
Sure. So just maybe 2 or 3 things as kind of wrap up thoughts. I think propensity models, that's kind of what Bob touched on. But when I say it, I think in terms of signal versus noise. So coming up with and applying models across the value chain so we can get better signals. So for example, is this loan likely to complete? Is this house likely to sell? Is this refi likely to happen? Those are pretty sophisticated questions when it comes to applying AI to answer them. So I think that's one trend. We're seeing propensity to take a place in our operational reality. I also see kind of what I call AI plus, artificial intelligence plus other things. So when you think of how impactful it can be when you combine artificial intelligence to other technologies, like distributed ledgers, like blockchain, it can really change things. And that's more kind of future forward, but that is happening. You know, pace of investment, we talked about that earlier, is still maintained pretty high in that space. And then lastly, just a very practical way, looking at where the humans are at and eliminating as many human touches as possible, changing the way we actually create a loan. And that's an active area of investment across the board. You know, multiple players in industries, both, you know, mortgage banks themselves and vendors, you know, and companies like here today is, you know, part of our R&D is focused directly on how do we just make it more seamless, bit by bit, step by step, component by component.
Step by step, I like that. And then Devin, you can round us out with this, your lender angle, which I think
Sure. You know, I can't disagree with Bob, since that was the first place that we focused, helping prioritize, you know, where loan officers are spending their time and making sure we're dealing with the right customers. There are 2 things that I think we touched upon, but I'll say they're really important to me. When we talk about all these data points that are coming, you know, unstructured data that could be really meaningful for us as the mortgage industry looks at itself and kind of reinvents itself, because that's what has to happen. We don't have a place to store that data. So closing that gap, I think, is going to be huge, right? And then capitalizing, how we capitalize on that information for the benefit of our borrowers and to make mortgage companies, you know, more robust financial services companies. I think that's, you know, that's going to be significantly important. The second thing, we touched on this as well, when it comes down to decisioning, I still don't think, and our experts here can contradict me, I still don't think we can get over, again, at the decision point, I still don't think we can get over the black box effect. So when an auditor comes in, it's not, how'd you make this decision? I don't know. That's not acceptable. So we have to figure out a way, when we become really significant, you know, when we put all these components together to effectively make that decision or make a recommendation for a decision to an underwriter, we have to have an automated way, I'm sorry, an auditable way to answer that question.
Right. And Bob kind of gave us a model earlier, just to build on that thought of just traceability, the model of the model, so detecting bias with a parallel model, and then grounded truth. You know, so I think we have the means of it, but like you said, Devin, you know, what is in the box? That's a real big question that we're seeing today from regulators.
Yeah, and I think that a key point is getting internally comfortable with the results that you're getting is one thing, but getting to the point where you can explain that to an auditor is a different level. And I think making sure that you could do both is really paramount.
Yeah.
These are all great points. You know, Bob, Will, Devin, Matt, really appreciate the insights. I think what was cool is we were able to go down quite a few kind of different trails and routes that I hope were important to everyone, and even the questions that we got. So first off, thank you for joining me.
Oh, it
Our
was a
pleasure.
lot of
having
fun.
me.
Thank you for being such a wonderful moderator.
Deal. And as a reminder for everyone who is in attendance, we will be sending a copy and recording of the Lunch and Learn within a few days. And then you can always go and check our Knowledge Center on the website at housingwire.com and get a copy of it on demand as well. But thank you everyone for joining us today. Great way to end a Friday. And thanks, Teresa, for that also great comment. So thanks
Thank you,
everyone. Have a
guys.
great
Take care.
day.